On today's Locked On Jayhawks, Mackenzie Mgbako, top 10 recruit, 5-star. He's down to 2 schools, Kansas and Indiana. Let's discuss.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can hear me as well Monday through Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. on KLWN in Lawrence with Rock Chalk Sports Talk going on with RCST trivia right now. That's a good time. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get any of your podcasts. You can also find us, like us, subscribe to us on YouTube with Locked On Jayhawks. So, on today's edition of the show, Mackenzie Mgbako is down to 2 schools, so we're going to be discussing the timeline here, what to expect, when to expect a decision, what happens if he picks KU versus what happens if he does not pick KU, all that on today's episode of the show. So we'll start with this. Andrew Slater tweeted out, and if you don't know who Andrew Slater is, I don't know. I would almost call him a recruiting guy. He's not like a recruiting insider or anything from the standpoint of like he's trying to break all this news, but he is a recruiting insider in terms of like he just has relationships. I don't know if he works with like the grassroots circuits or what, but very in the know. Like he has legit relationships with a lot of these different players and the players' families or handler or whoever it is. And he sometimes will, be used as somebody who can give them good information, right? Or can help them make a decision. So he is very much in the know of this stuff. And I believe he's tight with the Mackenzie Mgbako like family, their party kind of, so to speak. And all along, like he's been kind of sending out stuff about, the visits and stuff like that. Well, he tweeted out yesterday that it's down to 2 schools, that it is down to Kansas and that it is down to Indiana. First of all, in the pictures of him being at the visit at Kansas, he's wearing it's not like a cotton t-shirt under it, like maybe you used to see with like the Paul Pierces of the world and stuff, but he is wearing like the skin tight undersleeve. And I would just say there's been a long list of really good KU basketball players who wore t-shirts underneath their jersey. I mean, heck, I mentioned Paul Pierce, who's one of the, greatest KU basketball players or one of the most accomplished, NBA players who happened to go to KU of all time. Think back recently, like Svi wore sleeves under, and I mean, so all for it. If Mackenzie Mgbako wants to wear, a t-shirt, wants to wear sleeves underneath his jersey, because there have been a lot of great ones that have done that. But yeah, so he's down to 2 schools here. He was originally, he had visited 3. He was supposed to visit 4, St. John's, then Kansas, then Indiana, was supposed to visit Louisville on Friday. He will not be visiting Louisville now. I think that tells you the decision is soon. Now, again, if you're like, oh, he just visited Indiana last, like, don't look into that at all, because here's the thing. Nick Timberlake visited Kansas, then he visited UConn, picked Kansas. Hunter Dickinson visited Kansas, then he visited Kentucky, then he visited Villanova, picked Kansas. Don't read into when the order of the visits occurred. And I think Kansas feels like they're in very good shape here. I mean, I don't know. I guess we don't totally know what's going to happen. You never really do with recruiting. A lot of weird stuff can happen. But I think Kansas is in a very good spot here for Mackenzie Mgbako. And obviously, again, that doesn't guarantee it. So we'll talk about what happens if they do land him, if they don't land him. But I think the fact that he canceled his visit for Friday and means that he doesn't have any other visits scheduled, you can obviously easily and say, well, a decision is coming soon. Now, how soon? The finalists were announced yesterday. Does that mean we're going to get a decision later today? Does it mean we're going to get a decision on Friday? Does it mean we're going to get a decision this weekend? No idea. But I would be shocked if we haven't heard a decision by, let's say, the end of next week. And that feels way too long. I feel like most likely we're going to hear a decision for this in the next couple of days. I feel like, I don't know, that's not me knowing anything. That's just based on the timeline and trying to connect dots here. Do you narrow your finalists to 2? Do you cancel visits to, take some extra time to decide? Okay, by the time we get to whatever, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it'll have been multiple days, almost a week since you've been on your last visit, and had all these days to kind of figure everything out and decide. And if there already is a lean one way, then it makes it even easier to possibly make that decision. So I think KU is in a good spot here, and I would expect the decision really anytime soon at this point in time. All right, let's get into what happens if he does pick KU versus if he does not in terms of the impact for the Jayhawks and the roster construction. But first, this episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by Built Bar. Are you looking for a delicious snack but don't want all the sugar and calories? Then you need to try the best tasting protein bar ever with Built Bar. It's going to help you with eating healthier, not eating, some bad snack for you during the day, but it's still going to fill you up. And it tastes good too. It's covered in 100% real chocolate, real dark chocolate, and they have unbelievable flavors. Any of these things sound good to you because they should. Churro, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream. I love all of those things. I'm not sure how Built does it. Tastes like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better, they're healthy for you, under only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait around to get a box for years. Been talking about ordering at built.com. You can still do that for all your specialty flavors. But if you're near a Walmart, which, they're probably near a Walmart, you can run in and grab a 4-bar box with some of the hit flavors like cookies and cream, double chocolate bar, or coconut puff. If you're near a Sam's Club where you really want to stock up, get yourself a 13-bar box with hit flavors like brownie batter puff and churro puff. And again, you can still order online at built.com. Okay, so what happens for Mackenzie Mgbako if he does pick KU? Well, I think, first of all, it would round out the roster. It would not complete the roster. You have 12 scholarship players, essentially, in what we're envisioning it to be. And right now you have 10 scholarship players under roster, whatever you want to call it, between the 2 transfer additions you've done with Timberlake and Dickinson, between the 4 freshmen you have coming in with Johnson, McDowell, Jackson, and Adams. And then you have 4 returning players. 3 returning players, right? I feel like I'm missing someone. Oh, I missed the transfer of Arterio Morris. There we go. So 3 returning players: DeJuan Harris, Ernest Uday, KJ Adams, and then your 3 transfers coming in. So that gets you to 10. So at this point, if you add Mackenzie Mgbako, there's your 11th player. So you'd have 1 more scholarship. It would not complete your roster construction necessarily, but it feels like it would round out the roster in terms of being the cherry on top. Realistically, Mackenzie Mgbako, if you land him, will be the final rotation piece that you get. If you add another player with that other scholarship, it feels like that would be more of a developmental player, a long-term player, maybe somebody for depth, maybe somebody for, added just in case of emergency. It feels like this would be the last move to really kind of supplant the rotation and a player that would compete to be in that rotation and or start, right? He would be the final rotation piece. He would also be kind of the cherry on top, right? You already have yourself a nice ice cream sundae. Whether Mackenzie Mgbako picks you or not, you're going to have a really good team. And, part of the discussion, the decision for him is, do I want to go join this really good team and maybe not be option number 1 or number 2, but still have an opportunity to make a big impact on a really winning team? Or do I want to go to Indiana and be maybe the number 1 or number 2 guy, right? I'm going to have more opportunity, but the team might not be as good. And, that's something that every kind of player and recruit has to struggle with, what they think is best for them, what they think is best for their pro potential, what they're going to most enjoy, all that sort of stuff. But obviously for Kansas, they're going to be, even without Mgbako, right now they're number 1 on Bart Torvik. Now, if you add Mgbako, they get even better. They do. They go up from being the number 1 offense to being the number 1 offense with a wider margin. They go up from being the number 4 defense to being the number 3 defense. So they do get better with Mgbako, but he is the cherry on top. You can win a title without Mackenzie Mgbako. You can win a title with Mackenzie Mgbako. Gets a little easier if you have Mgbako, but either way, you're in that discussion. So he is the cherry on top. He's not necessarily a necessity like maybe Hunter Dickinson was to get to that discussion, but he's a luxury, and boy, would he be a great luxury. I don't mean for what I've said the last minute or two to discount, it's not that important you get him. No, it's very important you get him. Don't you want to increase your margin for having a better chance to win a title? Even if it only increases your chance of winning it all by 2%, those extra 2% are worth it in an NCAA tournament where every little percentage, every slim margin matters in a single elimination tournament. And he would be such a perfect fit for this roster in theory for what he would do. We did our Mackenzie Mgbako deep dive, I don't know, a week or two ago. Check that out. I think it's titled How Mackenzie Mgbako Would Fit In with the Kansas Jayhawks. You can find that wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube. He is somebody who is expected to come in and be a really good shooter. And he's 6'8", low 200 pounds. I think ideally he's playing the 4 for you, but he is still a 5-star prospect at 6'8". Could you get away with playing him some at the 3? Absolutely you could, right? So you would be able to kind of tinker between lineups of playing 3 little guards sort of, or playing, 2 little guards and 2 wings, which would be nice that you could have that flexibility based on, what works best for you, who you're going against that game, the matchup, whatever. You could also add the shooting of Mackenzie Mgbako. Now, you never totally know how freshman's going to translate, right? It worked with Grady Dick, didn't really work with MJ Rice, and, with, like, you go back, Quentin Grimes, he was a top 10 recruit. Like, the shooting was very hit or miss. I almost feel like that should be the expectation of Mackenzie Mgbako when he comes in. Like, he'll probably have some games where he goes off from 3. He'll probably have some games where he really struggles from 3. It'll be the inconsistencies. That's what we see a lot with freshmen. But if he's another option, at least out there, that the defense has to guard and respect as being a good 3-point shooter, that is the scouting report on him, then that opens up the spacing and helps out Hunter Dickinson inside. It helps out KJ Adams or whoever else that you're playing him with. So because of his shooting potential, you look at all the scouting reports, that's one of his big things. That makes him a really good fit. His versatility, his ability to play minutes at the 3 or 4, which is what you're really looking for here. That makes him a really good fit. And then it doesn't hurt that he's a good rebounder, right? I mean, you add Mackenzie Mgbako. Now you have KJ Adams, who's a really good offensive rebounder, not a great defensive rebounder, but that was more so with him as the 5, where he was boxing out the 5-man and trying to let other people get the rebound. Now with Hunter Dickinson at the 5, I'd imagine KJ will get better as a defensive rebounder. But if you have KJ, who's a great offensive rebounder, Hunter Dickinson, who's a good rebounder on both ends, Mackenzie Mgbako is a good rebounder on both ends, this could be a really good rebounding Kansas team. And now that's one way to make up for if you're only an average 3-point shooting team. You just get more possessions by being a better rebounding team. He also should give you, more athleticism. Never bad to have athleticism. They should have that in spades next season if you add Mgbako. You think about the speed and the quickness of Arterio Morrison and Marco Jackson. Nick Timberlake has a little bit of bounce to him too. KJ Adams is a good athlete, right? Like Ernest Uday coming off the bench, good athlete. Any of the freshmen you bring in, Marcus Adams, Chris Johnson, Jamari McDowell, like those guys are good athletes. So you add him and it only adds to your athleticism. And so, yeah, he would just be kind of a perfect fit for you in everything you're looking for to kind of be that cherry on top of the roster at this point in time. I think it would also further cement them, as I was kind of talking about, as the preseason number 1 right now. I think right now you probably will see certain people, like I think John Rothstein had Kansas at number 4 in his latest one, like behind Michigan State and Duke, and I forget the other one. Right now, you'll see some places like Bart Torvik has them number 1 even without him, but you'll see some places that maybe do still have Duke in front of them or one of those other schools to where they are in that 1 to 4 range pretty consistently at this point in time. You add Mackenzie Mgbako, I don't really think it's a debate at that point. I think at that point you are just the number 1 team, right? Like that's going to be pretty consensus across the board. Like, sure, maybe it'll be more 1 to 2 range as opposed to 1 to 4 now, where you still might have some people being like, no, but I love this Duke roster. But I think more consensusly, you will see them as number 1. And how much does that really matter? As I was talking about, I think every inch that you want to gain, you go for. And preseason number 1 isn't the be all end all. It's not everything that matters. I mean, I think the 2018-19 team, they were either number 1 or number 2 in the preseason poll, and that didn't work together. Now, it took some stuff happening, LaGerald Vick getting kicked off the team and Udoka Azubuike being out for the season after like the 9th game of the year, for all that to come together and everything not to click there. And clearly there were some pieces on that roster that ended up being on the next year's team that, were good enough to be the number 1 team in the country. So on paper doesn't always correlate with, everything else, but I mean, you'd rather have it on paper, right? You'd rather be expected to be good, because that does leave the opening for you to underwhelm to expectations. It's like the phrase for Kansas, no pressure, no diamonds. If you're not expected to be good, that's not ideal because that means that you didn't do something right. So, I think that would be the case pretty clearly. It would just kind of further cement them as that number 1 or number 2 spot. And then they would still have a scholarship open. What would they do with it? I don't know, but I think it would further cement too the idea that, okay, if you look at the 3 guards you have with DeJuan, Elmarko, and Arterio Morris, then you look at Nick Timberlake, as far as just players that you feel like are going to be in the rotation. You're already at 4 right there. KJ Adams, that gets you to 5. Hunter Dickinson, Ernest Duda as the backup center. That gets you to 7 players as part of the rotation. Mackenzie Mgbako would get you to 8. Now, typically we see a Bill Self team, maybe over the course of the regular season, play 9 guys. Maybe a 10th guy will come in for a few minutes as they're mix and matching at the beginning of the year. But realistically, during the regular season, it's 9 guys. Once you get into the thick of things during Big 12 play and the NCAA tournament, it's really 8 guys with maybe a 9th guy coming on. And sometimes it even gets down to 7 guys with an 8th guy coming on. So realistically, if we say 8 is the rotation, you add Mgbako, as I just mentioned, there's your 8th guy. Now, what would that mean for, I don't know, Chris Johnson, Jamari McDowell, and Marcus Adams? I don't know. Could they expand it out 1 extra shot? Possibly. But that would kind of just be the final piece, so to speak, I guess would be the pickup there. All right, let's finish up with Locked On Jayhawks. What happens, though, if he does end up picking Indiana? So if he ends up picking Indiana, Mackenzie Mgbako ends up not going to Kansas, what would that mean for KU? I think at that point, even though as much as I said you would still, with or without him, will be a national title contender, it still would be kind of a huge loss because you look at who's available at this point, and there's not a ton of other options to go to on the wing. Look at the available freshmen. I think among the top 40 freshmen available right now, the only ones that are available are Mgbako and Ron Holland. And yes, ideally you could be like, well, if we missed Mgbako, let's do everything we can to get in on Ron Holland. And if that worked out, then that'd be great because Ron Holland is very good. But it sounds like Ron Holland might be going to like Arkansas or the G League Ignite, and that I don't know how much of a chance KU would have there. Then you look at the transfer portal. Most of the 3 and 4 options are gone. Do you bring in a guy like Grant Nelson from North Dakota State, who's more of a true power forward center type, and you just play 2 slow bigs next to each other? I don't know that that's the best thing to do necessarily. Do you go out there and bring on a guy like DJ Rodman, the son of Dennis Rodman, who's like this 6'6" wing type who's really good at shooting threes, transferred from Washington State, right? Like there are a couple options out there, but there's none nearly to the level of what you would expect or the potential with Mackenzie Mgbako, and there's not a ton of them left at this point. Now, who knows with the NBA draft guys, if anybody comes back, I don't know if they have to enter by, May 11th or what the deal is with that, but it would be a big loss in terms of just, well, the options are kind of depleting there for you to have that cherry on top. You still would have the pieces to win it all. You just basically, this commitment is you wanting to have your cake and eat it too. And you would basically at that point just have your cake and not be able to eat it, right? Does that make sense? Like this is kind of that push you over the top type of move. So if he ends up picking Indiana, it's probably because of maybe he has a relationship there with Mike Woodson, or maybe it's just about the opportunity for the bigger role there. Because he comes into Kansas and you're competing for a starting spot. He might end up starting over KJ Adams. He might start next to KJ Adams. I don't know, but he has to compete for it, right? It's not like just a given necessarily. With Indiana, it feels like it is more of a given that he would probably be a starter. So you would understand that. But then at that point, going back to the idea of, there's not a ton of other options out there at this point, KU would still have 2 scholarships open to fill with not a ton of other options to go to, which, seems like not a lot of them are wing or those 3-4 options available for you. And so at that point, you almost wonder if KU would just go all in on, like developmental players or something like that, and how that would work out with the scholarships. That if Mackenzie Mgbako doesn't pick Kansas, there's not those logical candidates or that logical candidate to try to fill that last roster spot. And at that point, you could even say rotation spot, but I think probably you would just be like, well, Marcus Adams would just fill into that. And that would make some sense. But with Mgbako, you're talking about a top 10 recruit. With Adams, you're talking about the 45th recruit in the country, to which I'll have something coming out on this later. But guys who are not like I think it's top 25 or top 30 recruits under Bill Self, it is very rare that they are like starting a bunch of games or, playing a bunch of games or something like that. So, it's not the end of the world if he ends up picking Indiana, but certainly it feels like there's not a ton of other options out there, and this is the opportunity to kind of get over the hump. That'll do it, though, for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be back on Friday's episode. We're going to do a deep dive on Flory Badunga, who is visiting KU. He's one of the highest rated recruits for the class of 2024. There's been some talk about could he reclassify? Could that be the last scholarship they would use? I don't know how realistic that is, but we'll discuss on next episode of the show. You can find Locked On Jayhawks wherever you get any of your podcasts. You can like and subscribe to us on YouTube. You can also hear me as well, Rock Chalk Sports Talk, Monday through Friday at 3 o'clock on KLWN in Lawrence. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We'll see you next time on LOJ.